Good afternoon. Welcome to Unity of Fairfax. I'm Patty Hagan from our social justice team. I'm thrilled to see so many people, members of Unity, friends from other places, come to visit us with us today. We're all in for a very special presentation. Marcia Grimsley is going to share her amazing story of her 40-year relationship with Ray, a man who, when she met him, was a self-avowed white supremacist. She didn't know that at the time when she first met him, though. There's truly a story about a friendship beyond the limits of hate and prejudice. Marcia is going to take questions at the end of her prepared remarks. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. Marcia Grimsley is a professional life coach. Her company, Life Advancement Coaching, is based in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She's been a life coach for 15 years and sees clients in person, as well as coaching clients by phone around the country. Marcia holds a master's degree in counseling and therapy from VCU and has furthered her education with doctorate-level courses in counseling. Prior to her life coaching career, she worked as a therapist in Texas for 15 years. Marcia coaches individual clients through personal, interpersonal, career, and health challenges. She helps her clients develop the skills to live successful, happy, and creative lives. Marcia is a member of the integrative medical team at the Cancer Center at Mary Washington Healthcare. In addition to individual coaching, Marcia creates and facilitates transformational and personal growth workshops and offers motivational talks for groups. Marcia has been a Unity student for almost 50 years. She's served on the Board of Trustees in Fredericksburg, Virginia for the Unity Church down there. She's delivered the Sunday message and brought classes and workshops to Unity of Fredericksburg. In addition, she's been a 20-year student of A Course in Miracles and has facilitated many groups at Unity on the course. Please help me welcome Marcia Grimsley.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon, and thank you so much. I want to just do a few gratitude messages here. A special thanks to the Social Justice Committee, to Jackie, and to Patty Hagan. My goodness, Patty is amazing to work with. She's taken care of every detail, and this wouldn't be going on today without her, so Patty, thank you. Also to Reverend Russell for allowing me to speak in this very sacred space. I appreciate it. A few more thank yous. To Dana Agnolini and Elaine Silver for their inspiring music, Dana's intro music, and then Elaine Silver's music will end the program today, so I want to thank you to both of them. And finally, I want to thank my friend Ray, who without his support and encouragement and allowing me to use his memory at times, I would not be speaking here and bringing this presentation to you. You are a dear friend, Ray. I know you're watching today from across the country, and your friendship is an honor and a privilege, and thank you for that. I'd like to say before I start that I am visually impaired, so if I look around over you, not at you, I apologize. But I don't see you, so you're not making me nervous. So I can't see you anyway. If you get up and leave because you don't like the presentation, it won't bother me, because I won't see you. I'd like to say today that I would like each one of you to go home knowing that there is hope in every situation, and knowing that there is a path, a way, or multiple paths and ways to a world that can work for all of us. But each one of us has to commit to putting our foot on that path. And today we're going to talk a little bit about one approach that has worked for me and my friend Ray. People must be taught to hate. And if they can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. Nelson Mandela. There's a story that went around in the 70s and 80s, some of you might remember, about a woman and her 7-year-old little boy went into a grocery store. And as they were shopping, going down the aisle, a man in a wheelchair came around the end of the aisle into her aisle. And he was disheveled and had long matted hair and a beard and very dark and menacing eyes. And he had a bright and shiny silver earring on one of his ears. And a little bit fearful, she reached down to pull her son closer to her. But she didn't have a chance to do that because the little boy by then was down the aisle and had approached the wheelchair, was holding onto the side, leaning over, and said to the man, "Neat earring." And by the time she got down to the end of the aisle, they were talking and laughing with each other. And she realized in that moment that her son had taught her something. What she had seen was a menacing, a bit scary person she wasn't quite sure about. And all her son had seen was the bright, shining light of the silver earring. And he had no fear to move into that relationship and connection. After about a year of friendship with Ray, he finally did let me know that he had been a member of the American Nazi Party and another white supremacist group as well. And I was really shocked and shaken by the news because we had been friends for over a year. And of course, I was Jewish. For me, I held the light, just like the little boy. I remembered the light of my friend that I had known for over a year, and I had to see that light in him and hold fast to that light in order for us to move forward. And I think because of that, because I could do that, we did move forward. So let me go back a little bit. We were both in our mid-20s when we met, about 26, 27, in that age group. I had been raised in Pennsylvania in a small town, rather traditional Jewish family. I'd gone to Hebrew school, my brothers were all bar mitzvahed, my parents were active and involved in our local synagogue. But yet, we were not traditional, where my mother had a love of metaphysics and an interest in metaphysics and New Thought. And she had Edgar Cayce groups in her home for as long as I can remember. So I grew up with this very strange background of being a Jewish woman, a Jewish girl, with a mom who had Edgar Cayce groups in her house. And we had people from all backgrounds and different religions and different walks of life coming in for the groups. I remember that my mom was very clear when she raised us about knowing, trusting, and believing that everyone, regardless of who they were, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And she instilled that in us. I started to go to Unity, actually, when I went away to college in Philadelphia. There was no Unity where I grew up, but I remembered in the Cayce readings when people had asked him, we feel like we need an organized place to go, and we're followers of the Cayce material, and we want to do that, what would you recommend? And he always said that Unity was the closest philosophy to the readings. So I started going to Unity when I was actually in college in Philly. When I moved to Richmond to go to graduate school and then graduated there and got a job in Richmond, I started going to Unity of Richmond, and I started going to an Edgar Cayce study group out at a woman's house in the West End. Again, it was an interesting mix of all types of people. If you're not familiar with the Search for God book that they use in this study group, it teaches tolerance, forgiveness, love, cooperation, meditation, and other qualities of the Spirit, and it is non-denominational. When I did this talk a few weeks ago at Unity of Richmond, I was reminded by my friend Ray, when we talked about it, that I had dragged him to Unity down there. He had never heard of Unity, and he actually did start going with me on and off. So he has visited Unity, and he is aware of Unity and enjoys the Unity Church as well. When I got into this Casey group, it was a very open and friendly, warm and welcoming group. And there was a young man in there who was about my age, who had actually just started with the group a couple of months before I did. But he came in with no background. He knew nothing about Edgar Casey. He had never done any metaphysical readings at all. And he came in just curious, we thought. But he seemed to like the group, and he seemed to continue to come back. And his name was Ray. He was a rather quiet man, very respectful, but he was obviously extremely intelligent and peppered us with questions, some of them very challenging about New Thought material, the Casey readings and metaphysics, because he did not have a background in this. Years later, he told me that he sort of did this as a bet with someone. He heard about the group, and he came in to try to create some chaos there. But we didn't know that because he never did. He also told me that when he came to the group, and he really didn't have an intention to stay in the group, he had never in his life experienced such welcoming love, such acceptance, such kindness from people. He said he was floored. He was boiled over. He had never known anything like this. He came from a lower socioeconomic family in the Richmond area. No one in his family had graduated college. And it was a rather scary background in a lot of ways for a young child to be raised the way he was raised. When he came into the group, we did know that he was going through a divorce, that he had 2 children, and that he worked for some type of company where he was involved with working with bronze and carpentry and wood. He was very, very talented in that area. And so we went through the summer. When the fall came, I made a kind of an announcement to the group and said, back in those years I was driving, and I said, well, we're getting into the fall weather, and I won't be able to come to the Sunday night meetings because I don't drive at night unless there's someone I can ride back and forth with. At that point, Ray said to me, where do you live? And I told him, and he said, oh, I'm just a few minutes away. I'm glad to pick you up and bring you back and forth to the meetings. And so I took him up on his offer. And this was the beginning of a life-changing journey, I think, for both of us. As we rode back and forth each week, we talked primarily of metaphysical teachings, Unity, the Edgar Casey material, and Judaism. He asked me so many questions about Judaism, and I didn't really have the background to answer a lot of them. He let me know pretty early on that I was the very first Jewish person he had ever met, and that he was just curious. We got into this routine where we would leave the meeting, go back to my house, sit around for about an hour, have coffee, talk about religion. A lot of it was Judaism, and then he'd go home. Over the next year, he got to know my brother who lived in Richmond. I was dating someone from Pennsylvania at the time. He used to come down periodically to Richmond, where I got to know him. But I never really met any of Ray's friends or family. He was very private and kept himself rather apart. After about a year of our friendship, he said to me one day, as I recall, "Well, I've been to your house so many times, you've never been to mine. How about let me cook you dinner?" So I said, "This sounds good." So I remember driving over there one summer evening, and I walked into his house, and I can still see it because I walked into a room, a living room, that had bookcases everywhere. At least that's how I remember it. Books everywhere. And I thought, I've never seen so many books in one room. And he came out from the kitchen. He said, "Make yourself at home. I'm cooking." And so I started looking at his books. And I began to see books about white power, white supremacy, books about Jews, books about African Americans, with titles that weren't very friendly. I didn't know what I was looking at, and I was really surprised and maybe even shocked at that point. So I said, "Ray, what are all these books that you've got here?" And he came out, looked at me and said, "We need to talk." And I could feel, I still remember, my blood going cold and thinking, oh my God, what is this about? This was the furthest thing from my mind that he would be involved in anything like what it looked like from the books. So we sat down, and he said to me, I didn't feel that we could move forward with this friendship if I didn't tell you about my background. Since age 16, I have been a member of the American Nazi Party and another white supremacy group as well. And I was just floored. I didn't know what to say. And I said, "So all the questions about Judaism and Jews?" And he said, "Yes, you're the first Jewish person I met." But he said, "I've dropped out of the organizations." And he said, "I have to tell you that the love from that group that we're in, from those people, and the friendship from you has changed my life. And in a way that I never thought it would." So he said, "I want to move forward. I want this friendship to last. But I knew that I had to talk with you and let you know about this. I couldn't keep it hidden." And then the next thing I knew, he gave me a big brown package, and I opened it, and there was a beautifully carved Star of David, which he made on a platform for the wall. And he said, I wasn't sure which triangle went over which, so I called a local rabbi to make sure I got it right. And I thought, whoa, that really, for him to do that is amazing. So we talked what it seemed like for hours. And he asked me, do you think we can move forward? And I said, I'm hopeful that we can. And we both wanted this friendship. We knew that this friendship was based on our spiritual connection. And over the years, as it progressed, whenever we talked with each other, asked counseling from each other, dealt with problems, one or the other, it seemed like we always came up with a spiritual solution, or there was a spiritual basis for our friendship. And that's how we move forward. I eventually moved out to Texas, but before that, he let me know that he was going to be remarried. He had met woman who was part Native American, which was pretty amazing. And they were going to be married, and he asked me if I would stand up for him at the wedding. And I said, I'm honored that you asked me, but it's really not appropriate because you have a brother. And I think, as I remember, he also had a brother-in-law. And I said, you really need a man to stand up for you. And he said, well, I understand what's traditional, but there's no one but you that I want by my side. And so I did. He decided at that point there were things going on in his life, and with the encouragement of, I would say, the group and what he had learned about himself and his wife, who is a pharmacist, he decided to go to college. And he started and went to VCU, majoring in sociology. I believe it was around that time, or a little bit after, that he started working in the prison system, because he was thinking that he'd like to do therapy in prisons. I moved out to Texas, and he went on to William and Mary to get his master's in sociology. And then he started his PhD at University of Virginia. I do know that there were times when people found out about his background and it became difficult for him. And he had to deal with it and move through that. And I know he was always worried about his history and what people would discover. Later on, a few years later, we kept in touch by phone. To finish his PhD, he took a teaching fellowship at Texas A&M, and he and his family, by then he had a little boy, moved out to Texas, and my husband and I, at that time I was married, were able to reconnect with him physically and visit and see him and his family. Eventually, I think they went to Oklahoma, and he got a position in the college and university system because his goal, what he wanted to do, was become a professor of sociology and teach. So the years went by, we kept in touch, we saw each other when we could. Eventually, he got a divorce, and I think he moved to New Mexico, where he was teaching as well, and then back to Oklahoma to an associate professorship. And my husband and I, moved here. So we both crisscrossed the country, but the relationship, the friendship stayed firm. A few years ago, I guess it was, he had talked to me about possibly retiring. And he said to me, there's a professorship coming available, and I'm going to apply for it. I have good evaluations. I think I have a good chance of getting it. If I do, I'll teach about 3 more years, and if I don't, I'll just retire, which is fine with me, he said. So I said, go for it. The next thing I heard a few months later from him was that someone in his department had done some research through law enforcement and found out about his background. And it spread like wildfire through the department, and I think through the college that he was working in. It was very difficult because he told me that people who had been his friends for years moved away from him. And that, of course, he did not get the position, and that he was told exactly why. He mentioned to me that he thought that he had been unfairly treated, that he had really earned the position, And he had talked to an attorney. And the attorney told him we could sue. And he said to me, so I could sue the college? And I said, you could. And he said, or I could just forgive it and retire. And I said, you could do that. And he said, what do you think? And I said, I like the second option. And he said, me too. And again, in that moment, we laughed and we realized that Spirit, again, was helping us to make a decision when we came together, and that we felt that that decision was the right decision for him. And so it has been. He's enjoyed his retirement. About a year ago, maybe less, I guess, I had been thinking about this for a long time, that I would like to give him back a Star of David. And so I began to look for a sterling silver Star of David that he could wear around his neck on a chain because of that beautiful gift he had given me years ago. And when I found the right thing, I sent it to him. And he called me to thank me, and he said, I'm so grateful for this. It's beautiful, and I love it. He said, but I don't know if you knew that I had been wearing a Star of David for years, but it wasn't a very good one, and it broke. I had no idea that for years he wore a Star of David. I think what's important to Ray and I is that this talk not just be an interesting or unique story, but that each one of you who hear this take something away that you feel empowered in your life to make a difference, and to make a difference with people coming together and creating a more peaceful experience between groups of people. So some things I learned from Ray about hate groups. One is that people that go into hate groups feel marginalized. They do not feel part of a greater society. Many of them come from hate-filled, frightening, and angry childhoods. They also feel isolated from their peer groups. And one of the main characteristics of people that go into hate groups seems to be that they can't do self-reflection. And I think this is really important to stop here for a moment, because in our school systems in this country, we tend to focus on teaching children information and what to think. But self-reflection requires teaching our children how to think. And we need to begin to look at that as parents, grandparents, professionals who work with children, so that they can stay safe in the world, safe from being bombarded or pulled in to hate groups. So what do people find in hate groups? They find a sense of identity. They find a sense of community and a sense of personal purpose, because they don't have this. I've read articles by those who work with these individuals, trying to bring them out to rejoin society. And two things they talk about. One is the first thing they do is not fill them with a lot of information about what's right and what's wrong, but that they teach them self-reflection. And the second is that they begin to shift them into an emergence consciousness, a consciousness of merging back into the greater society. This is really important. So there's a professor at Harvard University who is an organizational behaviorist and globally known for her communications and systems thinking, developmental work. And here's what she wrote. Her name is Margaret Whitley. She wrote that communications and conversations are the most powerful way to initiate social change. Conversations between people are that powerful. She goes on to say that the impact of social dialogue is that it creates small conversations that can start big revelations, that conversations change people's minds and open their minds. And of course, that's what happened to Ray and I. This is something that every human being can identify with. She also writes that conversations filled with anger, hatred, and violence create anger, hatred, and violent behavior in this society. I think as metaphysicians and Unity students, we understand this pretty well and how this works. So, Dr. Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, said at one point when he was asked, how can we create a more peaceful world? He said, we can begin to focus our communications on the foundational principle that we are all one, and that should be the foundation of all of our interactions with each other. In his book, The Convergence of Science and Spirituality, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said that in honoring individuality and uniqueness, we do not have to subscribe to what he calls separation pathology, but that we can remind ourselves and each other that we are all part of the same human family. He goes on to say that unity ideology is what we need to begin to practice with each other so that we create healing where it's needed. So how do we do this? Well, certainly with mass communication, the masses are in charge now. We've harnessed this, and the opportunity is there for each one of us, whether it's on the internet, whether it's with our families, our neighbors. And yes, there are people that are not open to discussions. But Dr. Whitley says it's time we begin to have important conversations. The time is here now. And this is very, very, very important that we, each one of us, see the possibility here. Where do we begin? Well, Dr. Maya Angelou made a statement that said, what I see in you, I call forth in you. And what she was saying is that when I hold a high watch for you, when I see the light in you, and I remember the divine in you, Whether you remember it for yourself or not, I can call forth that light. I can call forth that light. And that gives each one of us hope. The Edgar Cayce readings tell us that we are individualized expressions of our divine spirit. Individualized expressions of that divine spirit. We are all one. Judaism teaches that there is one God, and all of mankind are his children. So over time, we have gotten these messages from our teachers, our religious leaders, our sages, our prophets. But we still seem to have a hard time to come to this. And it still seems to be a bigger challenge than ever right now. I'm thinking back to a few weeks ago, I was watching on TV the funeral of Elijah Cummings, Congressman Elijah Cummings. And I remember each person that came up to talk about him talked about his ability to bring people together across the aisles and to help people who were in conflict with each other begin to heal that conflict. And each person said in their talk that he was a kind man, a kind man. Course in Miracles tells us that if you can't be anything else, be kind. And that kindness creates miracles. The great Tibetan teacher Thich Nhat Hanh was asked, if your adversary is willing to at least come to the table, at least begin dialogue, where do you start? How do you start? And he said, you look in their eyes and you say, tell me about your suffering, and then you listen. And you listen, and you listen. And that's the beginning. My friend Ray is truly the kindest man I've ever met. And I have benefited from that kindness. I have grown from that kindness. And I'm so grateful for that. In the beginning of World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that he looked at the world situation and he saw the darkness beginning to cover Europe. And he made this statement, if we don't change the way we're headed, we will end up where we are going. Thank you. And I think we're ready. If there's any questions.
You want to sit down for your questions?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
I'll sit down. Thank you. I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
I think that interesting presentation about this incredible journey. We have time for questions. We've got two mics, Jose Perez and Tim Harps. If raise your hand and they will bring your mic. And when you talk into the mic, put it up to your face like you're eating an ice cream cone so we can hear you. Jackie?
Is it on? Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is on. So first I want to say thank you very much, Marcia. That was very informative, and you've certainly given me a lot to think about. One question I have, when you talked about Ray's interest in Judaism and you didn't have all the answers, how did you maintain patience and, I guess, comfort without knowing everything, but being willing to engage him in conversations or teach him about your religion?
Well, this was so interesting because I didn't know about his background. He knew mine, I did not know his at that time. So when he told me that he had never met anyone who was Jewish, and I knew his insatiable interest in religion, metaphysics, New Thought, I just thought that he was just interested, and that because he had never met anyone from the Jewish faith, he was just curious about it. It never entered my mind that he had different views or attitudes, or let's say he had been brainwashed. I guess that's a good word. And he was trying to see what was truth and what wasn't. I didn't know that at the time. So I was patient because we were just having talks. And it did come up a lot, but I thought he was just curious. Anyone else?
Something, Marcia, that might be of interest. We're coming on the holidays. People are going to be joining with family and friends from across the country, and the times are difficult. There's a lot of divisiveness within families right now. What is it that you learned from your relationship with Ray that might help people bridge those conversations?
Well, I think, what I've learned from Ray and just being interested in this topic is that to begin a dialogue, a real serious dialogue, where people share ideas, there has to be a space or an opening for you. And so the first thing you have to determine, I believe, is there a space? Is someone willing to share their thoughts and hear yours? And if there's no space, then I think just be as loving as you can be and as kind as you can be, and know that they're just not ready to hear anything different. They're just not ready to open up, to embrace someone who's different or has different ideas. But I think if there is a space, then respectfully share your opinion, share your thoughts, share your ideas, share your feelings, and listen to them. And it's okay if no one changes their mind, because really what's important is that coming together, that connection of human to human. And maybe your mind or their mind is just not ready to be changed. I always believe there's a divine order to everything, and everything is timely, so people have to experience what they have to experience, including the negativity that they carry, that we know creates a world of negativity. So you do the best you can. It's difficult, but I think to try to keep it as peaceful and loving as you can. There's a quick story that His Holiness the Dalai Lama tells. When he left Tibet and he went across the mountains into India, they were waiting for him. They knew he was coming with his entourage, but they didn't know who he was physically, and they didn't know when he'd get there. And by the time he got to India, he was tired and sick and disheveled and, hardly recognizable. And when he got to the border, the way the border patrol was going to recognize him was they were going to ask him the question, "Are you the Buddha?" Because, of course, the Dalai Lama is considered in Buddhism the reincarnation of the Buddha. And that's how they would recognize him and know who it was that was crossing the border. And Border Patrol came up to him at the border and said, "Are you the Buddha?" And he looked and he said, no, I'm a lowly monk, but I try to live in such a way that when you see me and look at me and experience me, you remember the Buddha that is within you. And I think that's really powerful. So maybe there was a lot of wisdom right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. That's a beautiful. Thank you to you and Ray, because we have to thank Ray for allowing you to share his story, which then makes your story together. My question is, and maybe you don't know the answer, but based on what you said about the library that you saw the first time you went to Ray's home, I can't imagine what might have happened to that during the years as he opened up and changed. Do you have any idea?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing the question. Could you repeat it, please?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little muffled. Yeah, but go ahead.
The basic question was, whatever happened to that library in Ray's home as things changed throughout the years? Do you have any idea?
Those books? I don't know, but that's a good question. That's a very good question. I have no idea. I think from the way he described it to me, and somebody actually asked me with a different audience when I gave this talk, what happened to the friends he had in those groups, or did they, was there negative repercussions for him leaving the groups? And so all he ever said to me was that he left and he never turned and looked backwards. So that was it. He just cut it all off. And he never had connection again with any of it. So I don't know what happened to the books. Anybody else?
I'm thinking about Thanksgiving too. And I'm going to be getting together with my daughter's in-laws. And we are 180 degrees apart.
It's hard.
I don't want it to be I want it to be a celebration of love. I don't want it to be just not connecting at all. We're not talking at all. Or just having to feel so reserved and so careful. So I was thinking about, how can I handle it? I think I'm going to dwell on what we have in common. And that is the love for the children that will be there. And providing a loving environment for those children. I think that's one thing that's in common with all people, is that they need a roof over their head, they need food to eat, they need a village, and they care about their kids and they want to provide for their kids. So I'm going to try to approach it from that point of view, how much we cherish these children and one another as family. What do you think of that? What do you think of approaching it from that point of view?
That sounds like a good place to start. I think to start what you have in common and to move from there and to just be authentic and honest. Course in Miracles gives us some guidance about this. Course in Miracles tells us that how many people do you need in a relationship to have a peaceful relationship and a loving relationship? And the answer is one in their right mind. So you can choose to be that one. I also have a family that politically is very, very different from the way I think. And we get together for the holidays and in between, and they're very dear to me. And sort of the way we deal with it, we never really talked about how we deal with it, but sort of what's happened is that we just don't discuss things that we don't see eye to eye on, especially politically. And that seems to work. And if by accident the conversation comes up, or I hear something, and it does at times, not necessarily directed to me, but just in general, I just don't enter the conversation, because there's really no place to go and stay loving. And the Course in Miracles reminds us, and Unity too, I think, if you can't be loving, don't be involved. So I just wait for it to pass and move in there, because I recognize there is no space for dialogue. Again, you have to first decide if there's a space or not. And I hope that your family Thanksgiving will be different this year, and that you're the one that can make it different. I know you can. I know you can. Good luck to you.
Yes, I just wanted to get back and address what Nancy just said. I'm sorry, because this topic is appropriate for Thanksgiving dinner for many people, I'm sure, especially given the political polarization that we see in this country. And you just mentioned something that went to my question about the space. Mm-hmm. It sounds like your friend was already drifting away from the white supremacists, etc. So not to minimize it, but he was already, it seems, heading to the right, down the right road, let us say. So what would have happened if, for instance, he would have said, oh yeah, I can be your friend, but I still support Jews and what Hitler has done, etc. See, this is where this comes to a dead end, because there are certain times where you cannot go forward. I, for instance, and I'll say this honestly, I don't hate, but I have very little space, to use your words, for, let's say, someone of a certain persuasion at this point in our politics. And I might be kind, but I'm not going to associate with that person or get involved socially with that person. Because it's okay for a Thanksgiving dinner, and you can be quiet and not be genuine and not express your feelings. But it's not okay to have a relationship with that person where I would have to pretend on a daily basis. I mean, I don't see how that could go anywhere. And again, my question to you is, what would have happened if your friend was not as pliable and was heading in the other direction? Would you still have tried to persuade him? Would you still have been kind? Would he have been your friend for life?
Well, to answer your question, and it's a really good one, thank you. I don't think there would have been the opportunity, because had he not been open, and I think what cracked him open was the experience with the group, certainly, and then, our experience furthered it. But I think there wouldn't have been the opportunity to build a friendship with him had he not been open to it, had he not continued to come to the group, had he not, been helpful to me and wanting to get to know me and so on. He would not have been interested in any of that. He might have come to the group a couple times and tried to, make us look like fools or whatever he was trying to do and leave, and I would have seen him again. So the fact that he stayed involved and was interested in getting involved said there was an opening. So you're right, there was an opening, and it continued to become larger and larger. Something else you said, there's no one is saying that anyone has to be in a relationship, I don't believe, with someone that does not have that there is no space to be there. Marianne Williamson, often says about forgiveness in A Course in Miracles, she'll say, just because I forgive you doesn't mean we have to have lunch. And I think, that's pretty much it. If there is no space for you, and for you to be honored and respected, you don't have to be agreed with, but honored and respected for who you are and what you believe, then there is no space for you. And that's very sad. That doesn't mean there might not be a space a year from now. People change. It's amazing how things happen in people's lives and they evolve and they change. So I never say, especially a family member, close the door, but sometimes you do have to mindfully withdraw and just send them love and blessings and pray for them and let them be. And sometimes that's very, very difficult to do. But you have no other choice. You can't lose yourself. But I do also believe, and this is really, I think part of the unity philosophy, is that people evolve as they need to, and they have the experiences they need to, and we really don't know anything. So when people have to go through these hateful, experiences, whatever their soul needs, I just pray for them and know that it's in some kind of divine order, and maybe they need those experiences. And I know that's difficult when it's a loved one, but I really don't know any other way to look at it at this point. I hope that's been helpful for you. Okay. Yeah, it's a struggle. Anybody else?
Other question. Kathy.
I was a little confused. Either I dozed off, which I don't think I did, that you were talking about, I'm echoing, sorry, about his, when he got that job at the university, and then they basically pushed him out, right, because of his background? Is that what I heard?
No. He worked there for 17 years.
Okay.
And he applied, as I remember the story, God, I get fuzzy with all the details, but as I remember the story, he applied, he worked there for I think about 17, 18 years as an associate professor. A professorship came open, and he felt he would like to apply for it. And he was thinking about retiring, but he said if he got the professorship, he'd work 3 more years. If not, he'd retire. And he felt he had the evaluations, and he had, whatever he needed to have a good shot, really good shot at getting the professorship. And apparently, and I don't want to go into the story too much because it's very private, but one of the classes I think he taught was sociology and criminology in sociology or whatever. He taught a course in that. And he got into it with someone there, or one of the assistant teachers there was also, not, very favorable with him, or something happened. And so this person had access to to a way, through a computer, a way of finding out about his background. I mean, all these people are, they have dossiers and everything with, the FBI and so on and so forth. And they hold them for years, and they found out about him. And they, ran it through the department, let people know about him. Matter of fact, a woman came to him and asked him if she should be afraid of him. And he said, no, you should never be afraid of me. And that's when he really knew that this had gotten out and caught up with him. And of course, then he was told, he would not be considered for the position. So I hope that clarifies.
Well, so that clarifies that. But the question that comes up in my mind is, he changed, correct?
Yes, he did. Tremendously. Like a
So-
reincarnation.
Right. So he was punished for years before in his life.
Yeah. But that's how life is, unfortunately. We have long memories, and Some people just never let go of things, and they can't. People do change. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, to make sure we give people a space to change. Because people do change and can change.
Yeah, it just seems odd to me.
Anyone else?
Other questions for Marcia? Yes.
So to build on the last question, I'd like to maybe ask about how should we treat people that do a lot of like bad things in their past but later on change and, you know, kind of like make their way into their light. How should we treat them? Should we still like judge them based on, you know, what they did in their past? Or how can we do a better job of recognizing that they are a better person?
Well, I think you know, your experience with that person, you would know if, you know, you would know who's standing in front of you in this moment, or you would begin to see. I think we know when people have made a transition, truly, and become more loving, and that's always the test. You know, Course in Miracles always reminds us there's two emotions, love and fear. Everything comes from that. You're either coming from a loving space or you're coming from a fearful space. And so I think we know in our relationships. But even if someone hasn't changed or is not ready to change, you know, to remember that they are a child of God. They are one with us. They are a mirror of us, of something. That's possible in the human psyche, and we don't have to be in a relationship with that person, but we do have to remember that they still are part of the human family. And if there's nothing we can do but pray for them, or be kind to them, well then you do what you can do. And whatever you need to do for yourself as well. Take care of yourself. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, well, my question is not so much on like a one-on-one, like I know this person changed, but it's more like on the community. How can the community recognize that someone has changed?
Are you talking about like a white supremacy group in the community, or?
Yeah, I mean with like your friend Ray, for example, how he had changed when he applied for that new position, but then I just when his reputation as like a white supremacist got out, then he was no longer considered for that position, even though he wasn't like a white supremacist at that time.
Yeah, it's sad, but that's, you know, some people and some institutions are not forgiving. And you know, in all of these things that it's hard for us, you know, who see things a bit differently to understand how could someone not get a position because of who they were, you know, 40 years ago or whatever. I think this is for all of us teaching, reminding us that our first work, this is what Unity teaches, I think so beautifully, our first work is to look inside of us and see if I am doing any of that. Am I unfairly treating someone? Am I unfairly holding their history up when indeed they're trying to change or they have changed? Am I not forgiving? Because the lesson is always, I point a finger and three are pointing back at me. The lesson is always growing myself, healing myself. And when I see these things in the world and I think they're unfair, my first responsibility is to make sure that I'm not part of that I don't do that. And maybe I don't do it on a major scale, but maybe I am doing it to a family member or a friend or a coworker. And so it's always about me and my growth and my evolution. Because we are one, and if there's, one human being can do something, as horrific as it is, there's something in all of us with that potential. And so we have to, the Course in Miracles reminds us, look at ourselves all the time, monitor ourselves, and forgive ourselves and the world all the time. And again, this is also an example or an opportunity, as it was for Ray, to do his forgiveness work. He forgave it and he retired. He wasn't going to hold that inside of him, that negativity. And that was a spiritual decision he made. He forgave it. You might agree that he did the right thing. You might disagree and say you would have done something different. I don't think it's about that. I think it's what he needed to do for himself. Just stay straight with himself and to stay as loving as he has become, and he is. Mm-hmm. Hope that's helpful. Okay.
We've got time for one, maybe two more questions.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else you want to know?
Oh, BJ in the back.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Well, to reach anybody else in his former white supremacy groups, did he ever try to reach anybody else and share what he learned with them?
From what he's told me, he cut that off and never looked back. I think for him, he needed to do that. He had a family, and he was headed in a different direction, so I don't think he ever thought about that. Although, I think his work in prisons, and over the years he's volunteered in the prison system. I think at one time he brought a Edgar Cayce Search for God study group into the prison system. So I think his giving back was more along the lines of that as a sociologist. Anyone else?
Well, Marcia, I want to thank you for a
Thank you.
wonderful presentation
Oh, you're welcome.
that hopefully helped a lot of us learn how to deal with some of the difficult people that probably most of us have in our lives.